I'm joined as ever by Mr. Adam Holz of Plugged In. Hello, Adam.
Hello, how are you, Andy?
I am not doing too bad. Now, we talk about all sorts of things: CDs, music, movies, all sorts of stuff,
Yep.
but not so much the artistic stuff, although we might touch on that. It's more
Right?
from the content and what you might be wanting to be considering.
Yeah. Yeah. And, as you said, we deal with all kinds of entertainment. And I want to start this morning with a couple of interesting stories. And one of them is something that we may have even talked about when it first came out on Netflix a couple of months ago. It's a movie called K-Pop Demon Hunters. Here's what's super interesting about this. Typically, a movie releases in the theater, and then a little while later it shows up on streaming video, right? That's the way things work.
Mm.
This released on Netflix at the end of June and absolutely exploded. So much so that, at least in the United States, I'm not sure if they've done this in Great Britain or not, they released it in theaters last week and it made $40 million in theaters. So, this is a movie, K-Pop Demon Hunters, about a world that is under assault by demonic forces, and the only way to keep them at bay is music. And so there's this girl band called Huntrix, comprised of three girls who are three young women who sing and fight demons. It's kind of an interesting premise. And even the premise that music brings joy and joy is what keeps demonic forces at bay, that's an interesting premise. So the other part of this story that I think is just fascinating is that, again, here in the United States, but I think worldwide, the soundtrack for this thing has gone completely crazy. So we're in like Frozen territory. If you remember Let It Go, their song Huntrix, this, fictional band, is now number one on the US charts, and something like nine out of the 10 tracks on the album are charting. And so this thing has absolutely caught fire. And I find it fascinating. We have people who do marketing, we have people who make music, and this thing just came out of nowhere. And it's original, intellectual property. It's an anime movie, so it has that kind of Asian style of animation, if I can phrase it that way, because we think of anime as being Japanese, but this is actually Korean, but it's very similar. And we have a deeply spiritual story, but one that's not based on the Judeo-Christian tradition coming out of Asia, but rather a different sort of mythological understanding of how spiritual things work. And the other thing that I'll say that's really fascinating about this is the movie focuses on how demons amplify shame and that we need to battle them by dealing with shame, which, is certainly an idea that I think has resonance for us as Christians, right? Because sin causes us to want to withdraw, to protect, to hide, and that can lead to shame. So I think on a whole bunch of levels, this is just an interesting story. And I took a screenwriting class once, many, many years ago, and the writer of that class said something fascinating. She said, if Hollywood knew how to make a hit movie, they would make one every single time. And I think the same is probably true with music, right? If they knew how to make hit music every single time, they would do it, but they don't. And so here we have this creative thing that it's just absolutely caught fire, both as a movie and musically. And certainly there are some things worldview wise that we want to pay attention to. But I think it's actually for, older teens on up, the content is not so problematic that you couldn't use it as a teaching moment too, and really talk about shame and sin and good and evil. And I don't know, it's an interesting story, Andy. So I wanted to share that with your audience today.
It sounds a little bit along the lines of, and I've got to be honest, I never watched it, but Buffy the Vampire Slayer. It
Yeah, a little bit.
sounds sort of along those lines.
Yeah, yeah. And I think a lot of things that we might look at and rightly say, well, there's some pretty big problems here. For a mature audience, there might still be enough catalyst for spiritual dialogue that maybe it makes it worthwhile. There's a director here in the United States. His name is Scott Derrickson. He did one of the Doctor Strange movies. He did The Day the Earth Stood Still. His best known independent movie is called The Possession of Emily Rose. He's a Christian, and he initially mostly made horror movies. And he said horror is the last genre where we can still talk about good and evil and spiritual things in a meaningful way. And I thought, well, wow, that's really interesting. So, again, there are things that we might look at it and just say, yeah, that's not for my family. Other things, especially if you have teens that are interested in this, your gut reaction, your knee-jerk reaction might be to say, no way. But we can dig a little bit deeper and maybe there's an opportunity there for a bigger conversation.
Interesting. I find it fascinating how it's changed over the years. It would go to the cinema, to the theater, then a little bit later it
Yeah.
would be DVD, and
Yep.
and then maybe a movie at Christmas if they wanted to really splash out as a TV
Yep.
channel. But it's all kind of it's everything. Netflix, Amazon, they're all producing almost like Hollywood blockbuster, but
Totally.
exclusive to Netflix or Amazon or whatever.
Yeah. And we're just in this very strange moment of so much content coming from so many different directions that as consumers, in some ways, it's never been better, because we just have an incredible amount of choice. And in other ways, it can just feel overwhelming, right? Because you can't even hardly keep up with it all. There used to be sort of a shared experience of our entertainment culture. Some have called it the monoculture. That's really gone now. We're, a people who live in our various different niches and or niches, if you want me to pronounce it the French way. Um, that it there's so much choice out there, and with YouTube, there's so much content being created constantly that yeah, we can. It just is fragmented, but every now and then something rises to the surface and kind of galvanizes people's attention.
I mean, just from the nothing else, the perspective of the fact that this is original content,
Yeah,
irrespective, for me, I think about time because I'm tired of seeing
right.
remakes. I mean, it's not even like we've got, oh, let's do a part two. Now we've got the first film done exactly the same, only
Right.
the cartoony bits even more like real. And I think,
Right.
okay, yeah, fine, but at least make another film that's a bit different.
Right. Right. And it almost has to arise completely organically as an accident, it seems like, because studios won't even commit to it because it's too expensive and too risky. Meanwhile, they commit to what seems like a sure thing and it falls flat on its face. So I'm sure if you are an accountant working for a movie studio, it's a crazy time right now because you never know what's going to hit and what's not going to hit, which brings me to my next movie that I don't know again if this is happening in Great Britain, but this weekend we are getting a re-release of Jaws in
Course we are.
theaters for the 50th anniversary of this movie. And I want to say a couple things here. There's a pretty good chance most of your folks have maybe seen Jaws at some point. If you haven't seen it recently, just like we often say with older movies, there may be more stuff in it than you remember, right? And at the core, this is a movie about a great white shark terrorizing a New York seaboard community called Amity Island. Roy Scheider plays a police chief who's trying to escape the violence in New York City with his family. And wouldn't you know it, the violence comes to the beach in the form of this monster shark. And he recruits a couple guys and they go after it. This is very, very early Steven Spielberg. I think the movie really holds together well. It's rated PG here in the United States. I'm not sure what it is there, but it would not get that rating today. There's a lot of violence here, obviously, with the shark eating people and such, and profanity and a little bit of suggestive material. But it's interesting to me just to ponder where we've come in the last 50 years, because a lot of people who study the history of cinema say this is sort of like patient zero for summer blockbusters, for the idea of a summer movie that sort of takes over the public consciousness.
Mm.
And I think it's a pretty well constructed movie if you're not afraid of large sharks and occasionally certain body parts getting disconnected from the main trunk of the tree, if you will.
Very delicately put there. So this is it a remake, a digital remake, or is it an actual new film?
No, this is a re-release of the original film, and they have done whatever their 4K digital magic is. I'm sure they've gussied it up and put it through a filter and tried to clean it up because obviously everything back then was not shot with the kind of cameras and resolution that we have now. So our eyes are used to a certain degree of realism.
Mm.
And maybe they just found an old print and, splash some chemicals on it and whatever they do to make these things happen. I don't know. It's not my area of expertise, but it's also telling to me, this is back to our, last conversation, that the best we can do this weekend is a holiday weekend in the United States. It's Labor Day. Um, and the best we can do is a re-release from a movie 50 years ago. To me, it sort of just speaks of how creatively bankrupt our culture is that really, that's the best we can do. And admittedly, it's a really good movie from an artistic standpoint, but man, not much else to speak of, really.
No, I can kind of understand some of the moments of, let's just call it the war films, Pearl Harbor, for one example. It is a monumental moment in world history. I can
Yep.
understand why every so often, let's remake it again, let's do it differently.
Yeah.
I understand that, but I think creative bankruptcy, I think probably sums up my thoughts on it because I just think How to Train a Dragon. Now the cartoon's more like a realness than a cartoon, but it's still
Right.
cartoon and it's identical as a film. And I just think, can we not do, where's creativity gone?
Yeah. No, oh boy. I mean, let's camp on that one for just a minute. And I might get on a old man rants at cloud, as I
Excellent.
sometimes am wont to do. Um, I think that we just have produced a culture of consumers, and Hollywood only wants to produce what it knows that we want to consume. So when something succeeds, they give us more of it until we stop wanting to consume it. And every now and then they're like, hey, remember this oldie but goodie? Let's try that one again, right?
Yeah.
But I think now we're entering an even more culturally perilous moment with all this AI stuff, where now we won't even be able to complain about bad films being made by Hollywood because we're now going to have bad films being made by robots. And I am a little bit, in all seriousness, um, I have some trepidation about what the implications for creativity as a culture, even as a global culture, are going to be because of AI, because you don't have to do the work. Even the idea that you would learn your craft, that you rise up through the ranks, that you figure out how to tell a story, you figure out how to write a screenplay, you figure out how to write a song or frame a shot. Um, if the robots can do all of that, what's left? I watched a YouTube video from a music producer the other day, and he said it took 4 seconds for ChatGPT to churn out a song with the prompts that I gave it. And it's both amazing and terrifying, right? And so I wonder with what how the idea of creativity is going to evolve in a world where we have resources to just instantly mash everything up and nobody has to work at these things the way perhaps we once did. And again, the proponents of AI are like, oh, it's going to open up a whole new golden era of everything. I guess I'm old enough that I'm skeptical, even as I'm trying to come to grips with the reality that you're going to have to learn how to use this because people who don't learn how to use it are likely going to be left behind.
Mhm.
If you said, I'm not going to learn how to use a smartphone or the internet, where would you be today? It's just a part of life. But I think as it relates to the creative output of artists, it will be interesting to see what happens from here, Andy.
I think we can all understand that the Hollywoods, the Pixars, all the big people are going to use AI in really clever ways because they've got the computer power, the electricity to power the
Right.
computers, which is the bit
Yep.
that we don't consider. You need a lot of
Yep.
electricity,
Oh, yeah.
and they'll use it to make some amazing things. But then we have things like the Blair Witch Project. Now, I'm not
Right.
recommending it as a brilliant film. However,
No.
it was made on
Well,
what,
it's
like,
a pretty well-made film,
well,
even
yeah,
though the worldview is
Yeah.
I've got some problems.
But it's like, what is it, 30p to make the film or something relative to
Yeah,
Hollywood? And I
yeah,
think that film should put some trepidation back onto let's call them the big boys, the big players. I think
yep,
that film should remind them, don't get too cocky, because you know
yep.
what? You might be able to use AI better, but someone can use it cheaper and actually
Well,
make something that people want.
that's exactly right. And I heard a quote many years ago, and I don't know who actually said it, but it's always stayed with me. And they were actually referring to the Star Wars prequels, and in which George Lucas had essentially unlimited amounts of money to do what he wanted. And at least when they came out, I think most of us were relatively underwhelmed with the actual storytelling, even if the world building was visually amazing. But the quote is, great art is almost never created with unlimited resources. And I
Uh,
thought,
oof.
boy, that's really interesting, isn't it? It's the very fact that you have to creatively deal with limitations to exercise and bring to life your creative vision. That's really interesting. I think about the movie Bohemian Rhapsody, the story of Freddie Mercury. I don't know if you had a chance to see that. And obviously, Freddie Mercury's dalliances with things that ultimately gave him AIDS is depicted in this movie. But there's a scene where they like put an amplifier on a rope and they push the amp through the room. And so one of the sound effects on one of those early Queen albums, Freddie Mercury was the lead singer for Queen, was how can we achieve this effect? And you see them doing these sorts of things. I'm like, well, that's amazing. Who knew that that's how they did that, right? But if you can all just simulate it with a computer, I don't know. I'm sure that we are going to get some things that are amazing. But I do, as I said, I do have my questions about what it's going to do for the artistic and creative process.
I don't think we're going to be lining up to go and listen to a computer generated song performed by computers anytime
I would,
soon.
ag- I would agree.
I
I would
mean,
agree.
technically,
Yeah.
perhaps, but yeah, but it's boring. They're all going to sound the same, aren't they? Because
Yep.
there is a limit to how much the human generated AI, let's be honest, it's created by humans, it's not that
Yep.
clever. There's going to be a limit to how much creativity it can physically create out of
Yeah.
zeros and ones.
I think you're right. And I think that we don't need to be afraid of it. I do think we need to be mindful about the implications. And as I'm trying to help my own three teenagers right now, it's part and parcel of what education looks like now. And, I was helping my son with a paper and he's like, well, I only use ChatGPT to help me think about the outline of the paper. And I'm like, well, the outline of the paper is sort of the structure of how you're thinking about it. And I get that you're using it, but you still want to be practicing using those critical thinking muscles or they atrophy,
Mm.
right? And I mean, even on a more basic level, I was visiting him in Phoenix, Arizona, where he's going to college, and he uses the map on his computer to get everywhere. And I've now been down there enough. I'm gonna again sound like an old guy, so forgive me. That I knew exactly how to get from the airport to his dormitory and campus without using a map. Like spatially, it's all in my head. And he was using a map for everything. And I think it's a great example, right? That when we're not using our brains, when we're just reliant on the technology, we don't have to think about it. And we have no sense spatially of where we're at in the midst of it. It's kind of a metaphor for a lot of things. And I didn't give him too much of a hard time for him. Like, Henry, I know where we're going. You live here. How can you not know where you're going? So anyway, I'm mostly just talking around the same idea over and over again here.
No, it's fine. That's why we have these. Right, Adam, thank you. If people want to find out all of the reviews that Plugged In offers to help,
You
then where
bet.
can they go?
You can come to pluggedin.com. We do music, movies, TV, video games, YouTube channels, books, technology, tutorials, all sorts of stuff. Pluggedin.com, and we're a ministry of Focus on the Family in Colorado Springs.
Adam, as ever, thank you. Have a great rest of your day.
You bet. Thank you, Andy.